Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final critique. If you can hear me just fine, just go ahead and say hello in the chat box and let me know that the microphone is sounding okay. We're going to have a fairly short session today, probably, just because it is the final week. There isn't as much work to do on our paintings, but if you guys have final questions about the course, it could be about anything related to the course, then we'll do a little Q&A at the very end. And of course, if you have questions as I'm critiquing your piece, make sure you ask them in the chat box as I go through. So I'm going to go, I know a couple of you had written and said you weren't going to be able to attend live, but if you are here, just say hello, and I'm going to go ahead and get started with Susan. And I know you were attending an event today, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started on yours, but if you're here, let me know. Now, Susan, you were doing yours in pastel just because of time restraints, and so I'm going to actually switch up my brushes here just so I can get it to look a little bit more congruent with your medium. Let's see, find my charcoal brushes. Okay, so the only thing I actually wanted to ask you, and you can let me know by just emailing me, is if you had said something about the colors kind of coming across a little more or less contrasty. So the only thing I would say, this is looking really nice, and I know pastel kind of has a tendency to kind of look a little bit more matte because it's not oil, but I would say one thing that would help, and that's jumping out to me, is some of the contrast in the hair. So obviously, like, the photo has a little bit more richness in that regard, and the only reason I'm saying that is because it will help to set off some of these colors in the skin tones. So if you could grab your darkest black, maybe an ivory black, I don't know exactly what pigments you have available to you in the pastels, but pick something that's a cooler black rather than kind of a warmish brown, which is kind of what we have here. So if you can go a little bit cooler with it and push that contrast, especially in those dark areas, surrounding the face, especially on this red side, because her highlights in her hair, that red orange, see how it's really starting to set off that red in the right side of the face. And I would definitely do the same thing on this side. Right next to the face here. Just wherever you see those really rich blacks in her hair, try to pick a cooler black, and that's going to help set it off. And you'll probably see that there's other areas in the face where you could probably push the contrast as well. One of the reasons we want to do that, though, is because it's going to set the stage for the values in her skin tone, which on yours feel maybe a little bit on the lighter side. And as you know, when we get lighter with a color, the chroma decreases. So we really want to hit some of those areas with that really intense chroma. So I think if you went in and just hit, some of these darks just a little bit darker. I realize these are really tight areas to kind of work, but just looking at where you can push a little more contrast into the eyes. And of course, think about your focal point as you're doing that as well. And maybe here in the darks, if you have a really, really deep, like alizarin crimson or a really dark red brown, don't be afraid to go in here and just find a few points of contrast in the parting of the lips and maybe the cast shadow underneath. It doesn't have to be like the same intensity all the way across. In fact, I recommend that you kind of let it kind of pick up and lose some of that edge like through the middle. It kind of creates a little more dynamic, and you can see it in her lips doing that as well. And then on this part here, maybe going a little bit more blue. I think that would help the consistency of the lighting, going from blue to orange. So don't be afraid to use some of these lavenders and richer kind of purple and blue hues in the lips, even though they are pinker on that blue side. Maybe just start to push them a little bit more. Just to be a little more consistent. And then those highlights, picking out that teal color. You know, nice kind of bright aqua. And the more chroma you can actually give to some of these highlights, the better. I realize as you get to a certain point, you're going to lose some of that intensity. But if that's the case, what I would recommend doing is around the highlight, build those chromatic colors, and then you can have that kind of one that's a little bit more pure white in the center, and that's going to help it kind of feel like it's popping a little bit more. So sometimes we're kind of limited by our pigments. Because you know the color intensity in a photograph and the color intensity our pigments are giving us can be sometimes very different. So just finding your most chromatic kind of blue color and adding touches of it around the highlight areas can kind of get those colors to pop a little bit more, so that way by the time you do get to that really high bright value, it still feels like it has some kind of vibration to the color. That's the challenge of this photograph, and the challenge of using artificial lighting on a model in like this scenario, because very rarely do we see this kind of intense chroma on the skin. But if you learn to balance it, it can all work really well together. So that would be my suggestion, is just to go in and look for where you can hit some, oh, that was a little too intense. Just hit a little bit more chroma, maybe like around in here. Instead of going more towards yellow, just push the chroma a little more towards the blue. You have some of those nice purples in there that complement the skin. You might look at where you could soften like a transition, like right through here. If we come in here, maybe find a break in that form so it doesn't have such a strong line going across. She has it kind of in here in the smile line, but it starts to kind of melt together right across this area. So maybe even finding kind of one of your neutrals to kind of bridge that gap a little bit and incorporate it maybe a little bit down here to soften up some of those features. As far as the red side goes, you might find yourself wanting to push the value a little bit deeper. I know you said the red maybe was coming across a little hot or bright, so but if you find that in person it's after you put in this black in the hair, you might find yourself wanting to go in a little darker for some areas. And maybe if you have something kind of like a burnt sienna or a dark red brown in the pastel, then I would definitely use something to that effect, especially where you get into these really tight spaces, like kind of like the lips where we had added some of those accents. She has a little bit more under here, and probably you could even go in with some alizarin and just warm that up a little bit and make that a little bit more high contrast. And probably in her eye socket, just a little bit more contrast before that red in that she has kind of a little bit of a hooded lid. It's not real obvious, but because we can still see her mobile eyelid, but we can see this fullness here to the upper lid. And I think if you kind of push the value in there a little bit more, you're going to get more dimension out of that area. The transition in here looks really, really nice. It feels a little bit bright on this side, but like I said, that could just be the photograph of your pastel coming across that way. But if you kind of look at it in person and you're finding that it could be pushed down a little bit in value, you might even just glaze over it with like a little bit of a deeper red, maybe an alizarin or something. Kind of feel that out and see how that works. But you can see the difference there, especially with the contrast in the hair. That makes a huge difference. And whenever you're working with really high contrast work, reference, you want to make sure you get those rich darkest darks, because it sets the stage for all of your other shadow values. And if you don't have that, then oftentimes what we do is we compensate by, not making these values dark enough, because we don't have that to compare it to. One thing you might try, I don't know if you have any, but you might try some of the ultra soft pan pastel black. They have one that's like a really rich velvety black, and it's really dark. And you might even just try applying it with your fingers, because sometimes it doesn't stick after a certain point using the little pan pastel tools. But yeah, you might try using something like that, and that'll help you block in such a large area really quickly too. And give you that contrast that's going to kind of pull the whole portrait together. Really, really nice though. If you have any follow-up questions, just send me an email. And another thing is, when you go into the hair here, don't be afraid to really push the chroma of those highlights. Again, on this side, go a little bit more blue. And that's just, all you're doing is kind of reiterating that you have a blue light versus a warm light. So, but on this side, it's really not that bright. Kind of more of like a burnt sienna. You could make it more chromatic if you wanted to, just to, again, to enhance what you already have, but just be careful that it doesn't pull the eye away from the portrait too much. You could put a little bit of that cad red down and then glaze over it with the black. And that's going to give you a little bit of a deeper red. All right. If you have any follow-up questions, just let me know. All right, Beth, are you here, Beth? I just wanted to ask, if you guys are here and you see that your picture might need some adjusting in terms of light and dark or the color temperature, just let me know. Oh, there you are. Hi, Beth. So how does your photo look? I realize that there is sinking in happening here in the hair and in the background. I'm not going to worry about that too much. But is there anything you want me to make an adjustment to? I can play with the curves or anything like that if needed before we get started. I'm just going to play with it and just see real quick if we can. Well, it seems pretty close. It looks pretty close. So, okay, we'll just leave it as is. And we'll go from here. This looks really nice. Really nice job with the skin tones. Like I said, I know the contrast here is definitely more in this range. The lips on yours are darker. Okay, okay. I'll keep that in mind. So I'm just going to kind of take a look here. If you have any specific questions or areas you want me to take a look at closer, just let me know. But I think it looks really good. She has a little more yellow maybe in your painting than we have here. It's very, very slight. And it has more to do with, I think, some of the transitional tones. So for example, up here in the forehead. So let's take a couple of color samples. So if you look in here, and this could just be that this area is sunk in, and if it is, it's going to look cooler because it kind of takes on that matte sheen. So just if you go back into your painting, what I would suggest is oiling out the whole face, wipe off the excess oil, and then take another look at some of these colors. So like this one in here is kind of like that, and then if I look on her, she has more of red in it. It's subtle, and one thing you could do if you wanted to enhance that red in select areas is you can do spot glazing. So what we did in the demo is I glazed the entire section that I was going to paint back into, but spot glazing is kind of like going back in and just glazing areas. I would still oil out first, but then you would take like a transparent red oxide, for example, and you would maybe just apply a tiny bit of that color, you know, over this area. And of course it's going to be transparent, so it's going to show, let me see if they have I think they have a glaze brush here. So it would just kind of start to warm that up a little bit more. And you could probably push the contrast a little bit as it pulls off here. And you could do that simply with glazing because glazing darkens. So that might be something you consider, especially once you oil it out. You might find that the colors are actually pretty close. Sometimes it's just a matter of the painting sinking in. And that's something I do when I go back in. Before I call a painting completely finished, usually I use like a medium of some kind, an oiling out medium, or something I can easily wipe off if I want to. So like the oleo gel or like a Gamblin solvent-free gel is actually a pretty good one because you can wipe off most of it at the end, and all you're wanting to see is that your painting is all reading, your transitions are reading the way you want. So it's something I utilized quite a bit. If you and you can still go back in and paint back into it if you find that you need to work further areas. And what I recommend is those little sponges, makeup sponges. They're like latex square or round makeup sponges. Anyhow, you can use those to wipe off the excess, and then you won't end up with lint or anything all over your painting. Okay, so looking a little bit closer, I would say one thing that would help too is to maybe take some of these highlight areas and yours is a little bit more on the yellow side and hers are a little bit cooler pink. So you have these really beautiful warm flesh tones in the half tones, and I feel like that's really where you capture her kind of average skin tone. Like this color in here is beautiful, it's spot on. But I think if you want to get her to glow a little bit more, using a complementary color, which is kind of more of a violet, for the highlight, it's going to create a little more dynamic quality to the portrait. So, and it's not everywhere on her, but you do see it wherever you see kind of a shimmery highlight, you see this kind of cooler tone before it transitions to that warmer tone. And I feel like you have maybe a sense of it in a few areas, but it still has a little bit more warmth to it. So let me do a little paint over of that color just over your highlights so you can get a sense of how that might change the painting. Let me get the brighter value of that. So you can see that she has different areas that some are a little bit more of a brighter value. Yeah, so that's a little closer to what you have in terms of the value of your yellow. And so, yeah, you would use something kind of like that just in a few areas, and you can see how it kind of creates a little more contrast and vibration against that yellow. And you could still have a hint of that yellow showing up underneath or even surrounding, and that's something I will often do, is have some complementary colors adjacent to each other, like a yellow and a violet, and that gives me that nice kind of, the colors kind of vibrate off of each other, and it really helps to get her to feel like she's glowing a little bit more, which can be a challenge on darker skin, is to, you know, because we're working in such a darker value range, you know, it's really hard to get that kind of inner glow feeling, but it is possible. You just have to utilize color and complementary color to create that. And you'll notice that a lot. If you look at artists who paint some models that have darker skin, you'll notice they use a lot of violets next to like a yellow. They're really playing up that contrast between the two colors, and or they'll throw in a really rich blue somewhere, and it might seem out of place at first, but it really creates a more interesting painting in the long run. Even if they're not seeing that exact color on the model, you're kind of enhancing and utilizing color theory to create a painting that is more alive, you know, than a photograph even, if that makes sense. Okay, so another thing I would suggest is just looking at where you can soften transitions, like for example the transition here to here, and that could just be a matter of finding a value or a color that could serve as a transitional color, so something between these two values, maybe even something that's a little bit cooler. So like I picked up kind of a pinky color here, so I'll put a sample of it here. So that's up in the forehead. And I just use that as a kind of transitional color to help soften that edge and round that forehead just a little bit more. And you can actually see that color take on a little bit up here, and just anywhere where you have those two values kind of transitioning, it could be a useful color. And again, because we're going a little bit pinker rather than yellow, you're playing with that vibration of the complementary colors. And I think if you went back in and just found a few of those lavender highlights, they're not going to be as intense as the one up here, but if you kind of found, she has kind of this pink purpley highlight here, you could go in and just introduce a little bit. Maybe even a little bit around the highlight of the nose. And she even has a little bit that comes in here. So remember that far side of the face starts to pick up a little bit more of that purple because of that background. And then in the mouth here, I think if you went in and just broke up some of this form here, this area is kind of one solid value. And there's a little bit of nuance happening in here. She has a little bit of a lighter color, kind of developing that form. Kind of rounding that out. And you might even find an area where this softens out a little bit. And the same thing as you move up into the upper muzzle. Look for where this part softens out a little bit next to the philtrum. She does have that darker tone coming all the way across, but you can see it gets a little lighter right through here. What's happening in that form, I'll draw it out kind of like a topographic map. So we have this plane coming up, and then we have this ridge and this plane coming up like this. So what we actually have is the plane's kind of doing this, and this and that, right? And so usually you get a little bit of a highlight right through this, and it's more obvious on this right side, but she does get it on that left side. And it's subtle, but you can see it kind of like here. And then she has a little dark shape and then another light shape. So pay attention to some of those subtle planes in that area. And that will help to soften it out in her portrait. Let me go back to my oil sketching. So I would just go in, maybe even lighten this further, and just maybe break that up a little bit. And just remember that even though the lips, we see these real sharp highlights, look at how soft those transitions are, if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, just if you go back into your painting and you want to develop it further, just look at some of those more nuanced transitions, areas where you can highlights on the skin, the more specular highlights, and you probably could go a little darker on the neck here, just to make it not jump forward as much, especially in this transition in here. Remember the neck is kind of cylindrical, so we'll have that gradual kind of darkening. Let me catch up on some of your comments here. You will start to see them yourself. I mean, a lot of what I'm pointing out are things that it takes time to be aware of these things and to start seeing them. You know, you might have heard me say this before, but you know, you can't really see things that you don't understand first or have a concept of at first. So, you know, a lot of times what all really learning to paint is at the beginning is learning how to see some of these things and knowing what to look for, and just of course, practicing. You're not going to always see it right away either, until someone points it out to you or, you know, something like that. But yeah, you're doing a really great job. Do you have any questions or any areas you'd like me to address? Alrighty. Well, if you do continue to work on it, feel free to send me an email if you know are feeling stuck or anything afterwards. Even though this is our last critique, I realized that the class was pretty fast paced for everyone, and so if you guys need extra help or you want me to take one final look and give you some written feedback, I'm more than happy to do that. Or you can also do it through the forum, of course, too, because I'm going to keep the forum kind of live for this class probably until the end of the year, just so that way those who are catching up can continue to post. I know some people are taking the class at a little bit of a different pace. But thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying the class, Beth, and enjoying it and learning a lot. Oh, hi, Selma. I'm glad too. So yeah, I think the critiques, even if you aren't able to participate in submitting to them and having your own work reviewed, it does help to watch other people, you know, get their work critiqued. Because I think, you know, and you probably notice this if you take classes in person, a lot of people are encountering the same kind of issues or struggles in their own work, or something very similar. So it does help a lot. All right, Beth, thank you again for joining the class, and I look forward to working with you again in the future. All right. Sepana, we are ready for yours. And I don't know if you're here live. I know you had a little bit of a schedule conflict with the morning session. Um, So, but if you are here, just let me know how the photo looks of your painting. Hi, Ludmilla. Welcome. Okay, so my guess is that the picture of your painting looks a little bit on the red side. So I'm going to do a little color balance and take some of that out. That looks a little bit more balanced to me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I should have kept the previous week's version in the program. Yeah, this is looking really good. I think we need to maybe work on transitioning some of the tiles, and there's a few things maybe in helping you capture your likeness. So you're doing a self-portrait. You have a lot of likeness in certain areas, like actually in the individual features. But I think in the face shape we need to make a little bit of an adjustment. So I'll help you do that here in just a second. But let's start with some of the color. Let me grab my brush. So one thing I'm noticing is that perhaps some of the areas where you could go a little bit cooler to complement some of the warm flesh tone, and then also you have maybe a little bit more yellow in the skin in a few areas. So let's start with the lips here, because I think that's the area where you have the pink kind of in the right family, but the value needs to be brightened up a little bit. So even if I take that lighter kind of pink average tone and I go over here, you can see it's just like a value step or two lighter, especially on that bottom lip. And so that contrast is kind of pulling the eyes there. So if we do a little paint over kind of simultaneously, oops, and I went in with that lighter value, let me look here. Yeah, and so, and also looking at the shape of those lights. So on your lip here, the light kind of comes down a little bit lower, kind of has this triangular shape. And you can see your contrast here ends up at the top, and that kind of gives a little more natural feel to the mouth. You could probably even go just a little less contrast there. And then of course you have your highlight color, which is a very, very light, kind of cool pink. And I think the key is going cool versus having something that's a lot more on the warmer side. I think also up in the upper lip, just look at where your lip is the fullest and kind of soften out that form and contrast a little bit more, and you're going to start to capture a little more likeness. Even that darkest red in there, maybe yours is a little bit more on the kind of too close to black, so try going in with a more rich, vibrant red and raise that line up just a little bit. Part of that reason is that you're outside, so there's a lot of light kind of bouncing around and filling in those darks. So they're not going to be as dark as you might think in the beginning. There are going to be dark accents within that, but it's not going to be, you know, kind of consistently like a solid line all the way across. And even under here, maybe look at where you can add a little bit of reflected light into that upper lip, and you're going to get a little more volume out of the shape. Okay, so now contrasting to that, looking at maybe some areas where you could push some of the warmer kind of yellowish accents in the skin, mostly in transition areas like here. We have a light spot right in here, and then we have a light spot kind of down through the middle, and there's this connecting tone right through here. So you want to look at where you can create some of those smaller forms and look at the hierarchy of the highlights. So this one is a little less intense than the one up here, and it's kind of more concentrated right around in this area right here. So just my main suggestion is looking at some of those more subtle transitions. You have some really nice colors happening over here. I would just say look at those tiles now and try to find like a color that goes in between these two tiles, so that way the transition occurs a little bit more smoothly. So for example, let's take this color and find something in the middle. And on your palette, you can just mix something that goes in between. And same thing like here to here, you have that value jump. You might want to find a value that goes in between, and it starts to round out those forms a little bit more. With the eyebrows, one thing you want to watch out for is notice how you have like this break in the hairs. So what I like to do when I'm painting eyebrows is I paint kind of the color I sense behind the eyebrows, and then as the solid kind of shape, and then I paint the individual hairs kind of, or suggest them on top of that layer once it's dry. So one thing that will help is it'll look a little strange at first, but to go in, it's usually a few shades darker and cooler than the skin tone for that area. But make sure you just have nice soft edges. You could even go a little darker if you want, like maybe like a middle brown, but make sure it's a lot softer of a color. And then once that's dry, you can go on top with a smaller brush and just kind of hint at some of the individual hairs over the top. Of course, you want to be very kind of natural about that as well. There's going to be areas where that detail kind of disappears and it just becomes kind of a dark mass. Another thing I like to do is go in with a little bit of skin tone afterwards, and I might come in and find where the hairs kind of break up a little bit, and it starts to give you a little more of a natural feeling to that area as opposed to having this real solid dark shape. Same thing can happen over on this side. Just go for that lighter kind of grayish color that's underneath at first. It'll look a little odd, but you can scumble that over and then go in with the darker color on top. And it's going to, you have to remember that it's hairs sitting over a form, so there's going to be areas where it's darker because it's pulling onto the underplane, like in here in the inner eye socket, and then it's pulling up onto the brow ridge here, so it's getting more light. So it's going to have light and darkness as well. Okay, so my other suggestion will be, besides going in with the jawline, I'll help you correct some of that. But in the eyes, make sure you're not going too light with the whites of the eyes. It's very easy to do, to want to put it in as a light value, but usually in the shadow, you could push it a little bit darker. And also look at the environment, because the environment is going to influence those whites of the eyes. So whatever direction they're facing, it's going to be picking up some of that color. There's going to be a little cast shadow from your eyelashes. And you can even see a darker kind of soft gray really close to the lash line. And that's just going to add a little more dimension to the eyes and really help the eyeballs feel like they're sitting back. in the skull. I'd say the same thing on this side. Just a soft shadow that's a value or step or two lighter than your eyelash line. And then you can always enhance the red that you have in the rim of the eyes. It's not everywhere, but like here it goes a little bit more pink. So look for where you can enhance that, and that's also going to add some liveliness to the eyes. Like in here where this comes down, it becomes very kind of rich red, and you'll find a few areas here and there where you'll sense some of that, and if you just add hints of it here, it's going to help add some more richness to the eyes as well. Okay, so before I wrap this up, I want to address the shape here in the jawline, because I think what's happening now, typically this left side is fine. So where your corner of your jaw occurs is usually around the level of the mouth. Let me grab a pen real quick. So if you look at the mouth, let me grab a dark color here too. You'll notice that like where the corner of the jaw starts to turn in, it's usually around like this. So you can see here like this angle. This angle, and then it changes. And then it depends on the person, but their shape could also change here, just below the muzzle. So I think that's what we need to do, is to add and drop this angle, which is right now the height. Remember, it should sit level with the mouth. So, and right now the angle is happening up here. So what should be happening is more from the elevation of the cheekbone to here, approximately, is going to be one angle. So kind of like this. And it's going to be a little less sloped than what you have. Something kind of like that. From there, we have another angle about here. And then it joins in with the rest. So you can kind of see you just need to push that out a little bit through here and maybe trim in a little bit here, and that's going to lock in your face shape a little bit more. You might also double check the height here. It feels maybe a tiny bit short, so I would maybe end up bringing your chin down, maybe just a touch. So in fact, this would probably end up going more like that. This side seems fine, so you can kind of see the symmetry here. And the corner right around here is not as obvious. You do have it though. It's right in here, and then there's this part of the jawline, and you can see the side plane of the face there. So you have that symmetry there. So it is there. You maybe could pull this out just a little bit, just to add some width across the lower jaw. And I think that's pretty much it. Again, look at where you can introduce those warmer peachy yellow colors. You have a few of them in there, especially like right in here, but maybe more towards the light. Try warming some of those up a little bit. You can do that with a glaze when you paint back in, or you could just mix the color that goes between the tiles, like I showed you, to help create some of those more subtle transitions. If you have any follow-up questions, just send me an email. All right, Colin, are you here? I just wanted to ask, because you had sent me two pictures. One is a close-up, and one is a little bit further away. I'm going to work on the close-up just because I can see the colors a little bit better. but this is looking really nice. I think, I can't tell from the picture, but it feels like maybe you have a little more contrast in your work and the photos just sunk in or you know, not coming across that way. So I'm going to just play with the curves a little bit. Oops. Got to pick the right layer first. Yeah, that feels a little bit more lifelike. Okay, so yeah, this is looking really nice. I know you said you plan to go back in and kind of intensify those highlights a little bit with some of the color, and I agree. I think that would really help to enhance some of the portrait, mostly I would say on the blue side. The orange side feels pretty good. My only suggestion would be you might consider taking like an alizarin type of color, maybe a little bit of alizarin and transparent oxide red, and doing kind of a final glaze on that red side just to knock it down in value. And let me show you why here. If we look at the value structure, I think you could maybe brighten up the blue on the right side and just push that value a little bit darker on the red side, just to give you a little more contrast. So if I took glazing, and you can do spot glazing for this too, you don't have to do the whole thing. So again, that concept of spot glazing would be a matter of taking like a deeper red, like the transparent red oxide would be a great option. And you just lightly, whoops, you just lightly enhance. This does not imitate real glazing very well. But you just lightly enhance some of the darker areas. And it's because it's transparent, it's going to just make everything feel a little bit deeper and richer. And then on this side, maybe going a little bit more intense with the blue, just to bring a little bit more light. Like that color in there is nice and rich. And one way you're going to get this blue to vibrate is by going in with the adjacent blue a little bit more chromatic. You can try using even a phthalo blue if you don't have like a turquoise. I hardly use a phthalo blue, and very rarely do you ever find the need for it in a skin tone, but in this situation it could be really useful because it's a very potent color. So just adjacent to that highlight, if you just beefed up some of the chroma, and just in the, it's just in those transitional areas. Then when you put in that nice intense kind of bluish white for the highlight, it's going to kind of have that vibrational contrast. Some of these colors might have gotten a little bit more on the neutral side, so just look for where you could even just scumble in. It doesn't have to be everywhere, just a few spots where the chroma kind of intensifies. Where those forms start to turn away from the highlight. So kind of surrounding the highlight, I guess I would say. Like right in here. And it's just going to provide a little more of that enhanced contrast compared to the red side. So where things maybe have gotten a little brown and you want to make them vibrate a little bit brighter, try going in with a little bit more of a chromatic blue for those areas. And it's going to add some of that intensity that you're seeking. I'm just looking here at the lips. I think the same thing here in the lips. You could go in with kind of a purple, kind of through the middle, But then when it starts to pull over to the left, it starts to get a more intense blue. So just look at where you can add some contrast there. And you might even find yourself wanting to build a little bit more dark back in here for that cast shadow. Maybe soften out that nostril a little bit. Maybe a little more contrast on this side underneath. And look for where you see how this dark kind of almost connects to the edge of her jawline. I think you might end up being able to pull this in a little bit. Maybe right through there. Again, that softness in the smile line right through here. So finding a color that will kind of serve as a transitional color and soften that effect. Even up here, it's a real broken edge, so just make sure you don't have a real hard line there. And that's going to make her feel a little bit less severe and a little softer. And then you can see where this form starts to round under. It goes quite dark in here, and you have the color right in here. So I would just carry that over to the edge there and tile it down the chin just a little bit. So that way it feels like it's wrapping back. And there's more subtle forms happening kind of in here that you can build up. Her chin overall, probably a little bit darker. And that's going to just enhance that feeling of that form turning away. If you took maybe a little more chromatic blue, introduced a little bit in here. This is a real tricky area right in through here because there's a lot of that play between the orange and the blue. Just drawing wise, maybe this right eye feels a little bit on the small side compared to the left eye. It could be a little bit of shrinking the left eye and enlarging the right, a little bit of each. That would be kind of my feeling. I'm looking compared to the nose and the mouth. I would say maybe go a little bit larger with this one first. Maybe just even opening it up a little bit more. Keep the inner corner pretty much where it is because I like the relationship here. Maybe we're going to raise it up a little bit. And just widen that eye a touch. That can help a lot. One way to tell is the size of the iris that you can see. And then of course her lid is going to get a little bit more open and full right there as well. So this will open up, the whites of the eyes will open up just a little bit more too. I think that'll help it feel a little bit more balanced. You might find yourself wanting to shrink the left side too, but just take another look at those. Compare them to the features that you have established in the face as it is. And you might find that her eyebrow will then need to just arch back a little bit further and a little bit wider. And that's going to also give a feeling of more width to the eye socket. Other than that, really nice job. If you have any questions, I don't think you're in here live, so just send me an email. And I think the main thing would be to enhance the blue as opposed to the red, because the red seems really chromatic and nice. So yeah, I would concentrate on that left side and bring a little bit more richness and chroma to that blue. It's not always that it needs to go brighter, but more that you have more intense chromatic colors adjacent to those highlights. And you might find yourself, yes, needing to brighten up some of the highlights as well, but be careful about losing some of that intense chroma. All right, really nice work. All right, so Natalia, are you in here? All right, well, if you are, just say hello and let me know how the photo looks. It looks pretty good to me. But if it needs to go darker or lighter, just let me know. It looks like you have a rich black here, but I can't tell if it's... Oh, there you are. So I can't tell if the hair looks darker in person or if it's just the lighting in the photo of your painting. So let me know how that looks in person. I know sometimes it doesn't come across in the photograph. Oh, it's too bright. Okay, let me bring that down. That could just be what it needs, is just to be brought down a little bit. How's that? Does that look better? I might need to adjust the chroma now just a little bit. Because I know it's saturated, but it's probably not that saturated. Anytime you mess with the light and dark. Does that look better? Still a little bright? Okay, let me bring that down a little bit more. And don't want to lose any of the details there. All right. Okay, so let's just go ahead and with that. So it does actually look like you have the dark black in here, that maybe the painting is just sunk in a little bit. You have really, really nice colors here. I think you really captured that red-orange. So I don't see any adjustments on that side. I would say maybe what could help is to maybe utilize a glaze in the blue side. Maybe one more pass of kind of a rich chromatic blue. You could use a phthalo blue or a phthalo turquoise and just glaze down this side. What that's going to do is create a little bit more of an enhanced blue chroma, and then you can paint back into it and just add those highlights again. So for example, here in the forehead, let me see if I can do it with this one here and just reduce the transparency. So if you took a phthalo blue color, and you just intensified it a little bit more, just to beef up that chroma in a few areas, and then you take the mixed highlight color and you just hit a few of those areas one last time. Because I think some of these maybe even got too light. What color are you using for your blue? Because that can influence as well. It depends on what your pigments are and what brand you're using too. But you can see how just building that a little bit brighter or more chromatic at first. The glazes are really good for that, because what happens when you mix white with any color is you're decreasing the chroma, and you're also going brighter, of course, but you're losing some of that richness. So how a lot of the Renaissance masters would get a really intense color at a really high value. So you get high chroma and high value. Let's use like a yellow as an example. Let's say you're trying to paint some lemons and you want them to really glow, but every time you mix white into your yellow, it kind of cools it off and you lose some of that intensity. What they would do is paint the underpainting a little brighter than what you want it to be in the end, and then you do a glaze at the end. And that adds that chroma back, because it's like stained glass. It's like the light goes through the glaze, hits the underpainting, and then bounces back out. So you get that intensity. And we use it very similar in our class, except we go back in and paint back into the highlight a little bit. So think of it like that. But glazing is very much like adding a filter or like a stained glass effect. And so it's really good for when you need something that's high value and high chroma. Does that make sense? So even if you can't get this kind of rich chromatic color, depending on what pigment you're using in that nose, what you could do is paint it in brighter white, like almost like a pure white, and then glaze after. Or you could glaze now and then go back in and paint your white back into it. I don't think it needs it in too many spots, but just a few. And then look at some areas where the transitions could be maybe a little more subtle, like here across the bridge of the nose, we have a little bit too harsh of an edge there. So you might take like a softer blue and paint in. Adding a nice chromatic color next to it too can also help that highlight feel a little bit more intense. Same thing here, maybe just looking for areas where you can scumble in a little bit more of a soft transition. Even on this underplane of the nose where it starts to turn down towards the nostril, don't be afraid to use, maybe some darker blues even just before it hits that nostril, because that is a round form, so it's going to start to turn under and get darker before it hits that dark hollow of the opening of the nose. Really nice forms in here. I like the softness you have across the cheek there. Just look for where you can maybe add some softer edges in the transitional areas. Also, maybe on this side, this got a little bit too bright of a value. It's a little bit deeper blue, and the reason it kind of vibrates off that orange, it's almost the same value as the orange. It's a little bit lighter, but you might try going in with just a little more of an intense blue into this area. And maybe even look at where you could carry some of this orange down into it as well, just to break it up where it transitions in this spot. I know it's a real tricky area to kind of paint because it's real broken up between the two light sources. But yeah, this looks really great. Another thing is down in the chest, it feels like it's a different color range than what you have in the face. So, when you go back down into the chest, you're going more greenish down here. Look for where you can, again, add that intense blue chroma just to help it feel a little bit more similar to the rest of the face. And it's not going to be nearly as bright of a value, so it's going to be a little bit more in the darker blues. So you might find just a few enhanced areas will help tie those together. Does that make sense? Really great likeness of the model though. Do you have any other questions? I don't know about you guys, but when I was painting this, after a while my eyes almost started to cross staring at such intense colors that were kind of vibrating off of each other so intensely. I had to take a break for my eyes and kind of look elsewhere and not be staring at such high chroma colors. Oh, beautiful job, Natalia. And if you do have follow-up questions, if you work on it further, just feel free to send me an email or post it in the forum. All right, Natalie, are you here? I wanted to ask you a few questions about the photo of your painting, if you are here. So just go ahead and say some adjustments. I feel like it looks very yellow, but I can't tell if that's just the photograph of your painting coming across that way. So just let me know. It also feels a little bit on the bright side. Oh, there you are. So is your painting that orange, kind of yellow, or is it coming across that way in the picture? Because I can take out some of that. Yeah, okay. Let me see what I can do here. Take out some of the red as well. This is a wild photo of this model, isn't it? I love the colors in this one. I almost did this one as well. It was really hard to choose which one to paint for the demo because I love some of the colors in this. They're really interesting. Okay, so let's see. Just trying to take out some of that yellow. Find a balance. Maybe it'll be some of the saturation as well. I'll desaturate it just a touch. Does that look a little better to you? Yeah, you know, regardless of whether, I mean, if you stick somewhat to the palette that we have, occasionally you might find yourself needing to venture outside of that palette that we used for the class. Sometimes there's just a pigment that, you know, you can't quite match that color. However, one of the benefits to working with a limited palette, like the structured palette that we used for the course, is that it forces you to learn how to make the colors work together using color theory so you get a similar effect. Even though you might not be able to match the color 100%. You can put another color next to it that helps intensify that color to make it feel more, like for example, let's say you need that really intense pink, but the alizarin is too cool of a pink, then you can put in a color that's complementary to that, and it's going to help, you know, like an orange or the yellow, and it's going to help enhance that color, if that makes sense. So sometimes that's what we have to work with as painters. You know, you have your colors can only mix a certain way, and so you have to understand some of the theory there to be able to manipulate how the colors work together in the painting, and you can still get that real intensity. Okay, so this looks better. Let's go ahead and get started here. You have a really nice likeness of the model. I would say just kind of squinting my eyes at the two, maybe what you could do is go in and glaze your shadow with like ultramarine blue. So maybe taking, I'll pick something that looks kind of like an ultramarine, and just glazing over and deepening. It's mostly like deepening that shadow a little bit. And you might find that, well, you can see that already just kind of knocked it back just enough to kind of unify it a little bit more like the photo. And then there's a couple of transition areas I think where you could mix some additional colors that are going to give you some really cool kind of vibrational transitions. So very similar to the demo I did, she has these ambiguous areas where this red, very literal, we're getting like a color theory lesson here. We have this red and this blue, and when you mix the two, you get a purple. So I think if you went in with some alizarin, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of white, you're going to get a nice kind of rich purple that you can use kind of as a transitional color. It's very almost rainbow-like. And just pay attention to where you see like, okay, this blue is more intense. It cuts up into here a little bit more, and then it suddenly transitions to a violet here in the middle, but then we get that intense blue again. So you're getting a little more of a dance with your colors as they interact. And you might find yourself needing to make one that's more of a blue violet and then one that's more of a red violet for when you pull out into this pink. And that pink, I think, could maybe go a little cooler at first as well. It feels a little orange at first. Maybe favor more of an alizarin, maybe add a tiny touch of blue at first, and then you can transition to that warmer one. So going in with a cooler pink at first in this area, and then it starts to go more into like that peachy orange pink that you had there. So you're just kind of shoving it over a little bit more to the left too, so that you get a little more of a gradual transition. Does that make sense? So you can see the difference there. Part of it is just deepening that blue, giving you a little bit more value range to work with. And then looking at how that pink transitions from cool to warm. Let's see. In her mouth, I would be careful about making the teeth real bright. You can kind of see if I just do a color pick, it's kind of more of a deep purple. They're going to be influenced by the light here, but I would just go in a little bit darker if anything. And then her lip has this really intense red, deep red underneath. It's a reflected light, but it has that real rich kind of chroma to it. And I think if you just introduce that intense chroma there, you can see it already makes the lips kind of feel more lively. She does have that darker core shadow. That could go like a little more of a purple. Just make sure you have that chromatic red underneath. And same thing where like this transitions, you have this purple like right here, go in with like a instead of going straight to an orange, just think you're like moving across the spectrum, the color spectrum. So you're going from a purple, almost like a sunset, right, to the blue, which is down in here, deep into deep purple, and then it goes again towards that light, that more yellowy kind of orange light. Now I do feel like this is too yellow, and you might want to tone it back to more of like a peachy tone, because that's going to give her a little more of a natural effect, and it's also a little darker value than what you have. So don't forget to check some of the values maybe there. And then this would also be a transition tone before that highlight in her forehead. And it even goes a little bit darker right along that edge where it meets the forehead. It looks like you did that, but maybe your values were just too bright to begin with. So putting that in kind of just adds some richer color. And even though this seems like it's real bright, if you compare it to like this color here, you're pretty close. You're maybe just a little bit light there. And that's because of that color gel adds that intensity on that side. But this side, it takes on more of like the color that you have here in the nose. And notice how it's a little more purple. It's again, it's that ambiguous like transition color here. So you might, it starts to pick up a little more of the orange, but you might introduce a little bit of that color here. And then it gets more peachy as it comes up towards the nose here. But that's going to help rotate that back towards the planes facing the correct direction. You could probably go into the nose area and just intensify the chroma of that blue, get it to really vibrate. And it does come in and kind of, you get again those ambiguous transition areas, so maybe a blue-violet to come in and break up some of these forms a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a play between that peach tone and a purple, but that's going to give you a little bit more room for that transition. I do feel like the width of her nose is a little bit on the big side. Let me do a quick drawing correction for you. So I would just shave off a little bit here. It wasn't much, but it makes a big difference. And then the wing of her nostril, it looks bigger because there's this cast shadow, but it's actually sitting right in there. So I think if we took your darker blue and just trimmed a little bit and made that more of a, I drew it in kind of solid. Let me do it a little softer here. Just make it a little bit more narrow. It shortened that overall distance across the nose. And it just helps to lock in her likeness a little bit more. And as a similarly, you're going to move this little shadow shape. Notice the width across the bridge of her nose here versus here. You might end up taking that shape and just nudging it up a little bit to more to the left and a little higher. And it's funny how sometimes just moving a tiny little shape can really help to capture someone's likeness a little bit more. This orange in here, maybe a little chromatic. You might find yourself taking some of this peach tone that you make for the forehead and just introducing it in a few areas, like down the bridge of the nose, around the highlight, just where maybe the oranges got a little too chromatic. And that's pretty much it. Do you have any questions? So we can take kind of a look at the difference there. Just a few changes, but it's going to push it a little bit closer to what we're seeing here in the photo. And I think that starting off with that ultramarine blue glaze is going to make a big difference because it's going to give you that more intense shadow, and it's also going to give you a little more value range for creating these transitions across the cheek here. Oh, the brush I use. So I use for eyelashes in the demo. I think I mentioned it, but I might have forgotten. So I use an old. So I have the Rosemary Master's Choice Filberts. They're the long filberts. I think it's series 278. But I have them in size 0. But I have some old ones where most of the hairs have fallen out. And I keep those around for doing the eyelashes. Another thing you could try doing is getting what's called a rigger brush. They're used a lot in watercolor, but if you get one, so it's called, And I think Rosemary has them too, a rigger. So it's kind of like here's the ferrule. It's a very long, slow, tapered brush. And it comes to a very fine point, and a lot of watercolorists use it, but you can use them for oil too. And they're usually a very soft hair, and I would just get like as small of a size as you can. And those can work really, really nicely as well. And one trick is when you're loading kind of your paint, twist the brush a little bit as you pull out of the color, and maybe use a little bit more medium just to get it to flow off the brush. But if you kind of roll the brush through the paint, it kind of helps to maintain the tapered kind of point to the brush, so that way you get a nice fine line when you're painting. All right, well, beautiful job. I'd like to see this if you do go back in and work on it, because no one else did this one, and I really, really like it. Do you have any other final questions? Oh yeah, you're very welcome. Okay, so that concludes the class. I can't believe it. It seems like the 6 weeks or 5 weeks have really flown by. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, okay, so I'll go ahead and, so I'm going to open it up to everyone who's here. So if you guys have any questions about the class or about anything really with oil painting, go ahead and type it in the chat box. Natalie, I'll answer your question right now. So explaining oiling out a little bit more. So the purpose of oiling out your painting, so when oil paint dries, some colors have a tendency to do what's called sinking in. And all sinking in means is that the oil kind of seeps a little bit deeper and you're left with kind of a matte, excuse me, a matte surface, and it makes the color appear lighter, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily dried lighter. So when you go in and varnish your painting at the end of, you have your finished painting and you go in and varnish it, the varnish re-wets the surface and it brings all those colors back. But what can happen when you're painting, let's say I want to go back into my shadows and they've sunk in and I'm trying to match my color from the previous week. And if I did not oil out, what I'm looking at is the matte, lighter version of that color as it has dried. So I might be mixing something that tries to match it, but I'm mixing it too light. So the reason we oil out is so that we can see the true color come back, and it allows us to match the color more accurately. So that's one reason for oiling out. And another one is if you're going to work on your painting through several layers, by oiling out, it helps to integrate that top layer into those bottom layers, so it doesn't look dry brushed on top. It kind of helps give a medium, laying down a little bit of a medium helps to allow you to blend a new paint layer into the previous paint layer, so it kind of all looks like it was painted at once. It creates that seamlessness. I've seen, it's very common to just try and go back in and paint without oiling out, and then you're creating this like dry, scratchy kind of effect on top. Not to mention you're probably not matching your previous colors very well. So whenever you go back in and paint, you want to oil out. You don't want to oil out the whole thing every time. I would just oil out the areas you plan to paint on that day. So if you're going to rework the forehead or just the eye, just oil out that area. The reason for that is you don't want layers and layers and layers of oil sitting on the surface of your painting, because over time they might yellow. However, if you oil out and then you paint back into it, you're not going to have that problem. But you just don't want to keep oiling and oiling and oiling and not painting back into it, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question? And then Natalia, you asked, will we have access to the tutorial videos after the end of the class? Yes. So yes, you will. I'm working on uploading to another platform called Gumroad. So the platform we're on right now, my personal website, has me set a time limit for the course. So I usually give people a little more time than the actual length of the class. I have it like 90 days or like 3 months from the purchase date. So if you look back on the purchase date that you signed up for the class, it'll be 90 days from then that your access will expire. But if your access expires, you can email me and I can reactivate it. So don't stress out if you log in and your class is no longer there, especially if you had signed up like really early on when I first announced it. So you can always reach out to me by email and I'll reactivate it. But what I do is I set up a Gumroad link. I upload all the videos to another platform, and then I send a special link out to all members of the class where you can get lifetime access through Gumroad. So even if you don't have a Gumroad account, it doesn't matter, because all you have to do is enter your email, and then you'll get a link where you can access all the content through them. So you'll have all the videos, and you'll have the downloads, the photo references, the handouts, all of that stuff. So I should be sending that out before the end of the month. I'm going to work on uploading all the video files here in the next week, and then I'll send out an email. So keep an eye out for your email address, because I'll send out an announcement with instructions on how to get that lifetime access. Okay? Alrighty. Any other questions? Alrighty, it looks like everyone is finished, so I want to thank you all for joining the class and hanging in there. I know this was a really intense online course because it was so fast-paced and we did a lot of content. You guys can go back and revisit this as long as you want, and if you guys, I will keep the forum kind of active until the new year or until I release a new class. I probably will keep it active in general, but you guys will still have continued access. So if you continue to work on these paintings and you want some written feedback, I'll pop in as often as I can and give you guys some written feedback as we move along. And those of you who are taking the course kind of at your own pace, same thing. You're going to have continued access through the forum. So Selma, if you are still kind of working through the class or something, then you can take as much time as you need and still access. And if even after the forum ends, if you guys really have a question, you want to reach out to me, just the email address, you can just reach out and I'll help you as much as I can. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to it. She's due in 2 weeks, so the countdown has begun. I will for sure. Thank you guys so much. All right, have a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you guys in the new year. I'll probably be offering another class. I'm not sure what it is. I'll probably send out a survey here in the next few weeks, and you guys can always give me your input on something you would like to see next. I'm always open for suggestions on topics that you guys want to see an online course on. And those of you who signed up early, and I had said I was going to send out a link to the copy of the first demo, the free webinar. I'm still getting that together, but I'll send that out to you guys soon as well. All right, thank you everyone. Take care and have a nice weekend.